Fort Stewart was supposed to be safe, a symbol of strength, a place where soldiers train, not where they fall. But on a quiet Wednesday morning, that illusion shattered in less than a minute. Gunshots rang out inside the 2nd Armored Brigade's compound. Chaos unfolded. Within moments, 5 soldiers were down. The shooter? Not a foreign threat, not an outsider. It was one of their own. A U.S. Army Sergeant Quornelius Radford was arrested at the scene. No history of violence, no combat deployment, just 28 years old with a supply role and a clean record. Or so it seemed. So what pushed him to open fire on his fellow soldiers? Was it a personal vendetta, a mental break, or something the military doesn't want to talk about? Because underneath the uniforms and the discipline, there's a darker truth emerging, and the story behind this shooting is far more disturbing than anyone expected. It started like any other morning at Fort Stewart, but at exactly 10:56 a.m., something went horribly wrong. Soldiers near the 2nd Armored Brigade combat team heard the unmistakable sound gunfire. Not at a training range, not during a drill, but right there in the heart of their work area. Panic spread fast. Radios crackled. Alarms triggered. Within minutes, the base was on lockdown. At 11:04 a.m., the entire installation was sealed off. No one in, no one out. For 39 tense minutes, confusion reigned inside the compound. 5 soldiers had been shot. 3 were in critical condition, rushed into emergency surgery. Others were bleeding on the scene, treated with whatever tools medics had at hand. It was messy, fast, and terrifying. And then, just before 11:35 a.m., the chaos stopped. The shooter was tackled and subdued not by outside law enforcement, but by fellow soldiers who risked their own lives to stop one of their own. No shots were fired by security in response. The attack ended almost as suddenly as it began, but the question lingered. What could make a U.S. Army sergeant pull a gun on his own unit? The investigation had only just begun, and the deeper they looked, the stranger things got. Fort Stewart isn't just another military base, it's the largest U.S. Army installation east of the Mississippi River, sprawling stronghold covering miles of land near Georgia's southeastern coast. Over 21,000 active-duty soldiers live and work here. Alongside thousands of civilian staff and military retirees, it's a place that runs like a machine, disciplined, structured, and secure. At least it's supposed to be. The 2nd Armored Brigade combat team, where the shooting occurred, is one of the base's most heavily equipped units. Battle tanks, armored vehicles, advanced combat gear. These are frontline troops, trained for high-risk deployment. But 2025 has not been kind to this brigade. In January, 2 soldiers died when their vehicle flipped into standing water during a routine training mission. In March, tragedy struck again. 4 soldiers deployed in Lithuania drowned when their recovery vehicle sank into a bog. Their bodies weren't found for nearly a week. And now another crisis, this time from within their own ranks. A gunman. A sergeant? Not in a foreign war zone, but right there in their own workspace. Some are beginning to wonder, is something unraveling inside the 2nd Brigade? Or is this just coincidence, stacked too high to ignore? Because as investigators examined the who, the where, and the how, one name kept coming up: Quorn, Quornelius Radford. On paper, Quornelius Radford didn't look like a threat at 28 years old. He was a supply sergeant assigned to Fort Stewart's 2nd Armored Brigade combat team. No combat deployments. No disciplinary marks in his official file. He handled logistics, warehouse inventory, equipment checks, paperwork, a behind-the-scenes role in one of the Army's most aggressive units. He joined the Army in 2018, straight out of Jacksonville, Florida. His service record, unremarkable, quiet, stable. But now, that quiet profile is raising more questions than answers, because, despite the clean military file, something was clearly boiling beneath the surface, and there were cracks, subtle ones. In May, just months before the shooting, Radford was arrested for driving under the influence, but somehow his chain of command never found out. The incident never made it up the ladder. It slipped through the cracks. Was that the first sign that something was off? His father, Eddie Radford, told the New York Times he hadn't noticed anything unusual. No erratic behavior. No emotional outbursts. "It's hard for me to process," he said. His son had even mentioned trying to transfer out of Fort Stewart. He'd said things weren't right, that he didn't feel respected, that racism was part of the environment. But nobody took those words seriously, till the morning everything exploded, and as investigators dug deeper, they discovered this wasn't a random act of violence. The shooting had a starting point, a trigger, and it began just one day earlier, the day before the shooting. Something happened. Quornelius Radford got into a heated argument with another soldier. It wasn't the first time they'd clashed, but this time, something shifted. According to sources familiar with the incident, the disagreement was tense, personal, and unresolved. The next morning, Radford showed up to base, carrying a 9mm handgun, a weapon he'd legally purchased in Florida just months earlier. He wasn't supposed to have it on base, but somehow he did. Reports say he waited, followed, targeted. He tracked one of the soldiers from that argument to a maintenance area and shot them in the chest point blank. Then, without hesitation, he turned the weapon on for others. All members of his own brigade, all wearing the same uniform, and while the Army hasn't confirmed a motive, there's one thread investigators keep returning to: isolation. Radford had expressed frustration in recent months, mostly to family. He wanted a transfer, he said. He didn't feel like he belonged at Fort Stewart. He told them he was facing racism but felt unheard, dismissed. Those claims were never formally reported, but they hung in the background like smoke before a fire. His father later said he wanted to leave. He felt like no one was listening to him. And maybe that's the most disturbing part, because this wasn't just a random breakdown. It was a slow burn, a quiet unraveling. A soldier trained to hold everything in until the pressure became impossible to hide. And when it finally erupted, it wasn't a cry for help. It was a shot fired in silence. It all happened in minutes. Radford arrived that morning carrying a 9mm handgun, his own, not military issued. He wasn't on a mission. He wasn't even supposed to be armed, but he walked onto the base like it was just another day. Then he made his move. He followed one soldier, the same one he'd argued with the day before, into a maintenance area. No warning, no shouting, just a single shot to the chest. Panic spread instantly. Before anyone could react, Radford turned and opened fire on 4 others. These weren't strangers. They were his coworkers, soldiers he saw every day, people who likely never thought he had it in him, but now they were on the ground, bleeding, struggling to breathe, and then just as suddenly it stopped. Other soldiers nearby heard the gunfire and ran toward the danger. They didn't wait. They didn't hesitate. In the chaos, they tackled Radford, wrestled the weapon from his hands, and held him down until help arrived. No gunfire was exchanged, no shootout, just raw instinct and pure courage. 5 soldiers injured. 3 of them rushed into surgery, all of them lucky to be alive. But as the scene was secured and medics rushed the wounded to Wynn Army Community Hospital, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't a random act. It wasn't a moment of madness. It was targeted, intentional, calculated. And yet, no one saw it coming. Despite all the reports, statements, and official updates, one thing remains disturbingly unclear. Why did he do it? Quornelius Radford hasn't spoken publicly. There's been no manifesto, no note, no explanation. And the Army isn't giving many answers either. Officials have confirmed the basics. He acted alone, used a personal weapon, and targeted his own coworkers. But when it comes to motive, they're silent. Some reports suggest the shooting stemmed from a personal conflict. Others point to something deeper: unaddressed grievances, systemic neglect, or even a slow-building resentment that no one recognized until it was too late. There's also the matter of his mental state. Was Radford dealing with something behind the scenes: stress, trauma, psychological pressure? The Army hasn't said. His father insists there were no signs. But one arrest for DUI and a denied transfer may only scratch the surface of what he was really going through. And then there are the claims of racism. Radford reportedly confided in family members that he didn't feel safe or supported at Fort Stewart. He said he wanted out, that he was being mistreated. But none of those concerns ever made it into a formal complaint. No paper trail. Just words spoken in private, ignored by the system until everything fell apart. It's led many to ask, was this preventable? We still don't know what Radford was thinking when he walked onto that base with a gun. But one thing is certain: something broke quietly, fatally. And now, the military is left with the aftermath, and a growing list of questions they can't afford to ignore. Mass shootings in America aren't rare anymore. As of this year, the Gun Violence Archive has tracked over 260 mass shootings across the country. That's more than one every other day. And while the numbers are down from previous years, 689 in 2021, 659 in 2023, the scale of violence is still staggering. But what happened at Fort Stewart stands apart. Military bases are built like fortresses. They're guarded, monitored, and heavily regulated. Weapons are controlled. Access is restricted. Background checks are standard. Yet, despite all that, a soldier with no combat experience, no known disciplinary history, and a legally purchased handgun still managed to shoot 5 people within one of the most secure Army facilities in the nation. That doesn't fit the usual profile. Most mass shootings happen in public spaces: schools, malls, offices, civilian settings. But this was the military, a place designed to be hardened against threats, A place where trust among soldiers is a matter of life or death, and that's what makes it different. Because if something like this can happen inside a U.S. Army base, under military discipline, oversight, and chain of command, it raises a much darker question. If they're not safe, there who is? 5 soldiers shot. One of their own behind the trigger. No motive, no warning, no clear explanation. Quornelius Radford didn't fit the profile of a mass shooter until the moment he was one. No deployments, no violent history. Just a quiet supply sergeant with a personal firearm. And something no one saw coming. Or maybe they did. A denied transfer, allegations of racism, a DUI arrest that slipped past command, whispers of a man trying to be heard in a system that didn't listen. All of it adds up to a question that still hasn't been answered. Was this preventable? The Army says they're investigating, but for now, the silence is deafening. The wounded are still healing. The suspect is in custody, and Fort Stewart, a place meant to prepare soldiers for battle, is left reckoning with a war that came from within. And if this shooting tells us anything, it's that the uniform doesn't make someone invincible. Not to violence, not to isolation, not to breaking. We may never fully know what triggered Quornelius Radford that day, but we do know this. Something cracked behind the gates of America's strongest base, and it's only a matter of time before the truth comes out. Another one does.